Hey everyone, welcome to FanFic Canon. Thanks for hitting play. I'm thrilled to bring this fan-made story to life for you. If you enjoy the ride and want more narrated fanfics, smash, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. And if you want audiobook of a novel of your choice, join my Patreon. Request any title that's freely available online, and I'll produce a full narration just for you. Now, let's dive into today's adventure.
However, just as Zheng social plan was running smoother than he expected, trouble came crashing in like a siren in the night. A bar in Hell's Kitchen caught fire. At first, it was just smoke, then flames, then chaos. The fire spread insanely fast, swallowing tables, walls, and curtains like it had been waiting for an excuse to explode. Worse, the surrounding buildings were packed with residents. One wrong turn, and half the block would turn into a death trap. The moment Zheng heard the news, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed a few police officers, threw together a quick rescue team, and rushed straight into the inferno. Inside, the air was thick and choking. Heat rolled through the hallway like a wave. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and every breath felt like swallowing fire. But Zheng didn't panic. He moved fast, kept his head clear, and made sharp calls in seconds. 2 officers secure the stairs. No one goes up alone. You with me. We check the back rooms first. He kicked open a door and found a couple trapped inside, coughing and frozen with fear. Zheng didn't waste time comforting them with words. He pulled them up. Move. Now! He kept one arm hooked around an old man's shoulder while guiding a terrified woman toward the exit. Behind him, burning which snapped and collapsed, barely missing them as they stumbled into the hallway. By the time they reached the entrance, firefighters were rushing in, hoses blasting, people screaming, and officers trying to control the crowd. Zheng didn't stop. He turned right back into the flames. Again and again, he pulled out residents trapped in upper rooms. He helped officers carry out an unconscious bartender. He even assisted in controlling the spread long enough for the firefighters to lock the fire down before it took the entire street. When it was finally over, Hell's Kitchen looked like it had survived a war zone. Smoke drifted into the night sky, red lights flashing off wet pavement. People stood wrapped in blankets, shaking, alive only because someone had been reckless enough to run into fire instead of away from it. An officer walked up to him, his face still streaked with soot. Zheng, the man said, voice low but heavy with emotion. You're seriously our hero. Zheng blinked, catching his breath. His lungs burned, his shirt was half ruined, and sweat was cooling into a cold sting against the skin. The officer continued, eyes firm. You didn't just save people tonight. You saved morale. You saved what we've been trying to believe in. Zheng looked at him for a long moment, then gave a tired smile. We're standing here wearing the same badge for a reason, he said calmly. Protecting people isn't optional. That single night did more than earn him praise. It earned him trust, real trust. And Zheng felt it clearly. These weren't empty relationships built on polite greetings anymore. These connections had weight, meaning, value. Later, when the night finally quieted down, Zheng returned to the restaurant, carrying that strange mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. His plan was working. Slowly, but for real, he had made progress. He had made friends. And he could feel that his path ahead was opening up, not because he was famous, not because he was powerful, but because people had seen him, seen what he was willing to do. When the restaurant closed and the city grew quieter, Zheng slipped into a small office tucked away in a corner of the Hell's Kitchen police station. The place was cramped and ugly. The walls were mottled and aged, like the building itself was tired. The air smelled like old tobacco, paper, and bitter coffee that had been sitting too long. A desk lamp flickered slightly, humming with weak electricity. Zheng leaned back in the chair and tapped his fingers against the table without thinking, eyes unfocused. How do I add friends faster? He muttered, half annoyed. What am I supposed to do, become a celebrity? Or a superhero? The moment the words left his mouth, ding, a cold mechanical sound rang out in his head. System prompt. Friend adding rules updated. Requirement. Both parties must meet in person to establish a friend relationship. Passive friend adding conditions have become significantly more difficult. Recommendation: host should actively add friends. Zheng Bin froze. Then he sat up straight, like someone just splashed ice water on his face. What? His eyebrows twitched. You're telling me I have to meet in person now? Seriously? It's already hard enough increasing friend points. He exhaled and pulled up the system interface, staring at the numbers like they personally offended him. Show me my current friend points. Friend points, 227. Zheng Bin stared. Then his mind started calculating instantly. 227 points, he muttered. That's enough to exchange for 2 family points. His eyes narrowed. But no, not yet. He leaned forward slightly, fingers tapping again, faster this time. 10 consecutive draws are always safer than a single draw. If I'm going to gamble on luck, I'm doing it properly. He shook his head, half amused, half frustrated. I only wanted to improve the working conditions of Hell's Kitchen police station, and somehow I got a reward this big. Then his expression softened just a little. Maybe these people aren't as cold as I thought. The quiet in the room lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then the office door suddenly slammed open. Zheng Bin turned his head sharply. Natasha Romanoff walked in first, moving fast. Hawkeye followed right behind her, expression tight and alert. And behind them came Phil Coulson, calm as always, but with that unmistakable seriousness in his eyes. The kind that meant something was wrong. Zheng, Natasha said immediately, not even wasting time on greetings. Come on, emergency. Before Zheng Bin could even ask, she grabbed his arm and pulled him up. Wait, what happened? Zheng Bin asked, confused but already moving. Coulson's voice was low and quick. We just returned from a mission site, he said. Director Fury is waiting at the Triskelion. The air instantly shifted. Zheng Bin's heart sank slightly. When Coulson spoke like that, it wasn't about paperwork. It wasn't about routine. It was about something big. The 3 of them moved through the corridor fast, shoes hitting the floor. No one speaking. Only urgency. They entered the elevator. The door slid shut. For a few seconds, all Zheng Bin could hear was a faint hum of the elevator cables and his own heartbeat. Then the doors opened. They were in the lobby of the Triskelion. It was packed. Agents moved quickly in every direction, carrying files, talking into earpieces, whispering near terminals. The atmosphere wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was tense, like a storm waiting to break. Coulson didn't slow down. He led them straight toward a secure conference room. 2 heavily armed guards stood outside the door. The moment they saw Coulson, they snapped to attention, saluted, and opened the door without a word. Inside, the room was quiet and cold. Nick Fury stood near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, his back turned to them. The city lights glowed behind glass, but Fury himself looked like a shadow cut out of stone. He didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. His presence alone forced the whole room to feel smaller. Finally, he spoke. Sit. His voice was low, heavy, like the start of a judgment. Natasha, Hawkeye, and Coulson took their seats. Zheng Bin sat beside Natasha, still unsure what kind of situation he had just been dragged into, but his nerves were already climbing. Fury slowly turned around, one eye sharp, face unreadable. His gaze moved across the 3 agents first, then stopped on Zheng Bin. And in that instant, Zheng Bin understood something clearly. This wasn't a normal meeting. This was the kind of meeting that changes your life. Zheng. Nick Fury didn't waste time with polite talk. His single eye stayed locked on Zheng Bin like he was measuring him. You've been doing impressive work in Hell's Kitchen lately. Calm, efficient, and visible. Zheng Bin's heart tightened slightly. Fury continued, voice low and direct. We've received intelligence. An unknown force is quietly infiltrating that area, and we need your cooperation. For a second, Zheng Bin didn't react. Hell's Kitchen was already messy enough. Gangs, drugs, violence, but unknown force coming from SHIELD's mouth? That meant it wasn't just street level. Zheng Bin looked up. Director, what do you need me to do? Fury stepped away from the window and placed both hands on the table edge, leaning forward. You stay active in Hell's Kitchen. Keep doing what you've been doing. Keep building connections. His voice hardened. And while you're doing that, you observe, you listen, you collect. Anything unusual, anything that doesn't fit the normal pattern, you report it. Zheng nodded slowly, but the pressure in his chest didn't leave. It only got heavier. Fury added, Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton will work with you. Not openly. Quietly. They'll be your backup and your shield. Natasha didn't speak. She just glanced at Zheng once, as if telling him, don't overthink it. We've got you. Hawkeye's expression was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. The kind of sharp that never truly rests. Zheng took a breath. I understand, he said. I'll do everything I can. Phil Coulson spoke up at that moment, slipping in smoothly, like he'd already anticipated the next problem. I've already arranged a full internal inspection, Coulson said. We're checking communication logs, access records, and field reports. If there's a leak inside SHIELD, we'll find it. Fury gave a single nod of approval. Good. Then his gaze returned to Zheng. And Zheng, if you need anything, you go through Coulson, equipment, support, information, whatever it is. His voice lowered. We back you completely. That last sentence sounded supportive, but Zheng heard the weight behind it. This wasn't a request. It was a mission. The meeting ended quickly. No speeches. No dramatic send-off. Just cold instructions and colder stakes. Zheng stepped out of the conference room and took a deep breath, like he'd been underwater and finally reached the surface. His palm was slightly sweaty. His mind was already running through possibilities. Unknown force infiltration. Hell's Kitchen. What exactly are they walking into? A voice came from the side. Hey! Natasha's tone was casual, like this was just another Tuesday. What's going on in that head of yours? Zheng blinked, then gave a small smile. Nothing. He paused, then admitted the truth. Just feels like the weight on my shoulders doubled. Natasha's eyes softened. She raised her hand and patted his shoulder. Good, she said simply. That means you're taking it seriously. Hawkeye snorted quietly. And it means you're not stupid. Zheng couldn't help but chuckle. Natasha tilted her head slightly toward him. Relax. You're not doing this alone. Zheng looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. With you two here, I'm not scared of whatever comes next. The three of them walked toward the elevator together, side by side. No big talk. No heroic pose. Just three people stepping into something they couldn't see yet. The elevator doors slid shut slowly, cutting off the noise of the Triskelion outside, like reality itself was closing behind them, like the world was giving them one final second of quiet before the storm. That night, the wind over New York howled like it was warning the city. Heavy clouds covered the skyline, choking the moonlight, making the streets below feel darker than they should have been. Even the usual neon glow looked tired. And inside SHIELD's headquarters, the atmosphere was worse than the weather. On the top-floor conference room, the glass windows stretched wide, reflecting city lights like a silent ocean. Nick Fury stood facing the darkness outside, arms crossed behind his back, completely still. He looked like a man who had already accepted the fact that things were about to get ugly. The door opened. Phil Coulson walked in first. He looked exhausted, not physically but mentally, like he'd been carrying something unpleasant for too long. Behind him came Clint Barton. His face was calm, but his jaw was tight, the kind of tension he only showed when he knew someone had made a serious mistake. Their footsteps echoed in the corridor, loud in the silence. Coulson stopped a few steps inside the room. Director, his voice was steady. We're back. Fury didn't turn right away. Then slowly he did. His gaze hit Coulson like a blade. Sit. Fury's voice was cold. We need to talk. Coulson and Hawkeye sat. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt sharp. Then Fury spoke. No warm-up, no patience. The mission failed. His voice dropped lower. Explain. Coulson inhaled and didn't dodge the bullet. Director, the failure is on me. He kept his posture straight, like he was ready to accept punishment. I underestimated Zheng and his group. He swallowed. They're more dangerous than we expected, more capable, more unpredictable. Hawkeye leaned forward slightly, eyes narrow. I'll add to that. His voice wasn't offensive, it was blunt. I misjudged the situation too. I didn't go all out fast enough. His expression darkened. We lost the initiative. By the time we adjusted, it was already too late. Coulson immediately shook his head. No, Clint, it's not your fault. Intelligence was incomplete. We didn't have enough data going in. That's why we miscalculated. Hawkeye scoffed. Phil, stop trying to carry everything. Coulson's voice sharpened. Someone has to. The tension rose instantly, like a match hovering above gasoline. Then Fury slammed his voice down like a hammer. Enough. The air froze. Both men stopped speaking at the exact same time. Fury stepped forward, slow and deliberate. His expression didn't change, but the pressure in the room doubled. The responsibility is mine, Fury said coldly. I underestimated Zheng too. He leaned forward slightly, staring at both of them. But this is not the time to argue over blame. His voice cut deeper. This is the time to correct a mistake. Fury turned toward the table display and tapped it once. We reinvestigate them. From the beginning, no assumptions. Then he paused, and his eye narrowed. And there's something else. His tone dropped even more, making it feel like the room itself grew colder. Kane! Both Coulson and Hawkeye reacted instantly. Fury spoke the name like it was a problem he hated admitting. Kane has an ability. He stared at Coulson. Why wasn't this flagged in advance? Did intelligence fail, or did Kane awaken recently? A quiet voice came from the corner. Natasha Romanoff stepped forward from the shadows like she'd been there the whole time. And maybe she had. If Kane awakened recently, Natasha said, her voice calm but edge of concern, then Zheng group is evolving faster than we planned for. Her eyes lifted to Fury. That puts them beyond our expectations. She didn't say it dramatically. She said it like an inevitable truth. And if they're beyond our expectations, then we prepare for the worst. Coulson's forehead tightened. Director, he said carefully, choosing his words. I don't understand why Kane's awakening changes things this much. He looked genuinely confused. We have analysis teams. If it's an ability, we study it. We build a response plan. We adapt. He spread his hands slightly. Why is this suddenly a major crisis? Fury didn't answer immediately. He just stared at Coulson, like he was deciding whether to tell him the truth, or whether the truth would make things worse. And in that silence, everyone felt it. Whatever Kane's ability was, it wasn't normal. It wasn't simple. And it was about to turn Hell's Kitchen into something far more terrifying than a burning bar. Nick Fury shook his head, with a hint of helplessness in his tone. Phil Coulson, things are not that simple. Kane's ability may be much more complicated than we thought, and Zheng and his gang have hidden too many secrets. We can't take it lightly anymore. Hawkeye clenched his fists, and a hint of determination flashed in his eyes. Then what should we do? Regroup the team and attack again. Nick Fury nodded. Yes, but this time we have to be fully prepared. The intelligence department will reevaluate all members of the 427 Zheng group, especially Kane. We need the most accurate intelligence and the strongest combat effectiveness. Phil Coulson stood up, looking serious. Understood, Director. I will be personally responsible for this operation to ensure that no mistakes will be made. Nick Fury patted him on the shoulder, with subtle concern in his tone. Phil Coulson, I know you are under a lot of pressure, but we must succeed this time. The safety of SHILD and the entire world depends on it. Hawkeye also stood up with a firm light in his eyes. Phil Coulson, we will fight side by side, and we will never fail again this time. The atmosphere in the conference room was still solemn, but there was a hint of determination and hope. Nick Fury looked at them and prayed silently in his heart, hoping that this time they could successfully uncover the secrets of Zheng and his gang and protect the peace of the world. The night wind was still howling, but in this building, a group of fearless warriors were ready to face the storm. In the dim, strategic room, only a few beams of cold light shone in from the vents above ahead and reflected on the metal table. There was a repressive atmosphere in the air, as if the whole room was waiting for something to break out. Natasha Romanoff sat at the table, her long legs crossed, but her face showed no emotional fluctuations. She spoke slowly, her voice low but with a hint of imperceptible tension. According to the intelligence we have, there are several people who were originally ordinary citizens, but in less than a month of contact with Zheng, they became mutants. Her eyes swept across everyone present, as if to emphasize the seriousness of this fact. Nick Fury sat at the other end of the table, his single eye slightly narrowed, his eyes blazing. Not only that, he took over the conversation, his voice low and hoarse. Zheng and the brother and sister next to him were not mutants at first. He paused, letting the weight of the sentence completely weigh on everyone's heart. What does this mean? He may have mastered some way to open super abilities. The room was silent for a moment, as if everyone was digesting this amazing speculation. Phil Coulson's face turned pale, and his fingers tapped the edge of the folder unconsciously. If this is true, to what extent was power expand? He murmured, with obvious worry in his tone. Nick Fury nodded and continued. If a force can master or create a large number of mutants, then they have the ability to destroy a country. There was a hint of coldness in his voice. And Zheng may be such a threat. Natasha Romanoff frowned, obviously not satisfied with the speculation. We can't draw conclusions based on speculation alone, Fury. We need more evidence. Her tone was firm, but not without caution. I agree. Fury nodded. However, according to the existing intelligence, Zheng background may be more complicated and dangerous than we thought before. His single eye flashed with a sharp light. We must conduct a comprehensive investigation to find out the true face of him and the forces behind him. Phil Coulson sighed and frowned. The problem is that we just promised not to enter Zheng territory, and you know that Hell's Kitchen is extremely xenophobic to outsiders. He looked at Fury, his face full of helplessness. How can we arrange for agents to go in and investigate? The atmosphere in the room suddenly became solemn, and everyone was thinking about possible solutions. Natasha Romanoff's fingers tapped lightly on the table, making a slight sound, as if to match the rhythm of this silent game. We need a breakthrough. Fury's voice broke the silence. An opportunity for us to infiltrate quietly. His eyes swept across everyone's faces and finally landed on Natasha Romanoff. Nada, do you have any ideas? Natasha Romanoff was slightly stunned, then smiled. You know, I always have a few plans in my pocket. She blinked, with a hint of playfulness in her tone. But this time, we may need to take a risk. Tell me. Fury raised his eyebrows, obviously interested in her plan. Natasha Romanoff straightened up, and her expression became serious. We can take advantage of Zheng confidence. He thinks his territory is impregnable and would never think that someone would dare to pull teeth from the tiger's mouth. She paused, her eyes 24 firm. We can arrange a fake identity. Let me approach him as a mutant and gain his trust. Phil Coulson's eyes widened, obviously shocked by this bold plan. This is too dangerous, Natasha Romanoff. If he finds out your identity, I know the risks. Natasha Romanoff interrupted him with an unquestionable determination in her tone. But this is our best chance at the moment. We don't have time for hesitation. Fury pondered for a moment and finally nodded. Okay, let's do it. We need to act as soon as possible and can't delay any longer. He looked at Natasha Romanoff with trust in his eyes. What support do you need for people? Natasha Romanoff smiled slightly, with a confident light in her eyes. Give me a week. If I don't get any news back, you will implement Plan B. Got it. Fury nodded, with a firm light flashing in his one eye. Everyone get ready. This battle has just begun. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became tense, and everyone began to prepare for the upcoming action. Natasha Romanoff stood up, patted her clothes lightly, and her eyes showed an unyielding will. She knew that this would be a life-and-death contest, and she would never back down. The night was as dark as ink, with thick clouds hanging low, and the neon lights of the Big Apple reflected colorful light and shadows on the streets after the rain. Nick Fury stood in the secret base of S.H.I.E.L.D., frowning and looking like a torch. The air in the room seemed to become heavy because of his silence. "Director, are we really going to do this?" Agent Phil Coulson stood opposite Fury, looking serious. He knew that every time Fury made such a decision, it meant that a difficult task was about to begin. Fury turned around slowly and looked directly at Phil Coulson. "We have no choice. Before we get more intelligence, we can only monitor. Remember, no active contact and no conflict." Phil Coulson nodded, knowing that Fury's decision was a done deal, but he was still a little uneasy. "The target is Tony Stark." Fury interrupted him, his voice low and powerful. "He is the key. We must keep an eye on him. Any slight movement must be reported immediately." Phil Coulson took a deep breath. He knew the difficulty and importance of this task. "I understand, Director. Keep an eye on the target for 24 hours. Collect intelligence. Don't get close, don't contact 50. Fury nodded slightly. "You go and prepare and leave immediately." Phil Coulson said no more, turned and left the room, and disappeared at the end of the corridor. Fury looked at his back, and a trace of imperceptible worry flashed in his eyes. A week later, the night once again enveloped the Big Apple City. Zheng drove a jeep and sped on the road, leading to Stark Manor. His mood was a bit complicated. After all, he was going to meet Tony Stark, the man who was famous for his genius and wealth. Starting from Hell's Kitchen, after nearly 3 hours of driving, Zheng finally saw the outline of Stark Manor. The manor covers a large area and has gorgeous buildings, like a modern castle. Standing in the night, it exudes an inviolable majesty. Zheng parked his car in the open-air parking lot of the manor. After getting out of the car, he couldn't help but look around. The parking lot was full of luxury cars, each of which was worth a lot of money. His Jeep looked particularly abrupt in front of these luxury cars. "Mr. Zheng, welcome to Stark Manor." A low and powerful voice interrupted his thoughts. Zheng looked back and saw that it was Happy, the driver and bodyguard of Stark Manor. "Happy, long time no see." Zheng greeted with a smile. Happy nodded, with a serious expression. "Tony is busy in the basement. I'll take you there." Zheng nodded, followed Happy, and walked into the manor. Along the way, he couldn't help looking around, and the luxurious decorations and advanced technology in the manor made him dazzled. "What is Tony busy with recently?" Zheng asked tentatively. Happy shrugged. "What else can he be busy with? He's been working on his inventions in the lab all day long." Zheng smiled. He knew that Tony Stark was obsessed with technology to the point where he almost forgot to eat and sleep. The two walked all the way through the gorgeous hall and long corridors, and finally came to the basement. The entrance to the basement was heavily guarded, showing the importance of this place. "Tony, someone is looking for you," Happy said to the intercom. Tony Stark's impatient voice came from the intercom. "Who is it again? Didn't I tell you not to disturb me?" Happy glanced at Zheng and said calmly, "It's Zheng. He came from Hell's Kitchen." The intercom was silent for a moment, and then Tony's surprised voice came. "Why? Why is he here? Let him in." Happy nodded and motioned Zheng to follow him in, pushing open the heavy metal door. Zheng walked into Tony's laboratory. The laboratory was full of various high-tech equipment and unfinished inventions, and the air was filled with a faint smell of motor oil. Tony Stark was standing in front of the workbench, holding a newly assembled mechanical arm in his hand, with a focused expression. Hearing the footsteps, he looked up and saw Zheng with a surprised smile on his face. "Zheng, long time no see. Why are you here?" Zheng smiled. "Come to see you, and by the way, I want to talk to you about something." Tony put down a mechanical arm in his hand and patted the oil on his hands. "Then sit down and talk. I just need a break." The two sat down in a corner of the laboratory, and Tony's expression became serious. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Zheng took a deep breath. He knew that the following conversation might change a lot of things. "It's about S.H.I.E.L.D." Tony's eyebrows raised slightly. "S-H-I-E-L-D? What do they want to do?" Zheng looked around and lowered his voice. They are targeting you. Tony was stunned for a moment, then showed a disdainful smile. Targeted? They are quite discerning. Zheng knew that Tony was always confident, but he still said seriously, "This time is different. They sent Phil Coulson agent to monitor you 24 hours a day and collect intelligence." Tony was silent for a moment, then laughed. "Phil Coulson? He is quite dedicated. But what do they want from me?" Zheng shook his head. "I don't know, but you have to be careful. They won't target you for no reason." Tony nodded. His expression became serious. "Okay, I will be careful, but if they dare to come to make trouble, I will not be polite." Zheng smiled. He knew that Tony Stark was never a person who gave up easily. "That's good. Contact me any time if you have anything." Tony patted his shoulder. "Okay, don't worry, I will. You take a rest first. I'll go finish the experiment." Zheng nodded, watching Tony return to work. He knew that this night was destined not to be peaceful. The morning sun shines through the dense treetops and sprinkles on a winding path. Zheng sits in the back seat of a black car, looking at the Stark Manor outside through the car window. Surrounded by green trees, the air is filled with a faint scent of grass. In the distance, the surface of the swimming pool sparkled in the sun, and the white lines on the tennis court were clearly visible, as if waiting for a fierce duel at any time. "Wow! Such a big place. Does it feel empty to live alone?" Zheng said to himself, but he couldn't help but feel a little envious. He thought of his current savings, and then looked at this mansion, thinking whether he should also buy himself a similar villa to enjoy this luxurious life. But this idea was quickly dispelled by him. "Well, forget it. I'm living well on rent now, and besides, the land tax for such a big villa is not a joke." Zheng shook his head lightly, seeming to feel a little amused by his momentary impulse. The car slowly stopped, and Zheng eyes fell on his old car that he had been driving for many years. "It's time to change this car," he thought to himself. "I have feelings for the car my father left me, but it's old after all." At this time, Happy came over from the direction of the villa and motioned Zheng to follow him. Zheng straightened his clothes and followed Happy to the villa. Along the way, he felt a little complicated, with some expectations and some uneasiness. When he arrived at the door of the villa, Tony Stark was already standing there, with his hands open and his signature confident smile on his face. "Welcome to the Stark Manor, man," he said enthusiastically, as if he was welcoming an old friend who had been reunited after a long absence. Zheng was slightly stunned, then smiled and teased. "Such a big place, Tony. You live here alone. Don't you feel lonely?" Tony Stark shrugged, and the corners of his mouth raised a slightly teasing arc. "I am Tony Stark, a world-renowned rich man, and it is definitely natural to live in such a manner. Loneliness? Not there, man." Zheng listened to Tony's confident answer and felt speechless. This guy really feels good about himself, he thought. But at the same time, he also realized that the agreed salary might not be enough. "Well, it seems that I have to reconsider our agreement." Zheng decided secretly in his heart, but still kept a smile on his face. "Tony, since you are here, let's talk about the details of the cooperation." Tony Stark nodded slightly and made a gesture of invitation. "Definitely, man. Please come in. We will drink and talk." The two walked into the villa. The spacious hall was filled with various high-tech equipment and artworks. Zheng looked around while walking and couldn't help sighing in his heart. This place is simply a perfect combination of technology and art. "Tony, you really opened my eyes here." Zheng praised sincerely. "Thanks, man. Everything here is my hard work." Tony Stark said proudly, "But now I need your help. Let's create more miracles together." Zheng smiled slightly, and the fighting spirit in his heart was completely ignited. "Okay, Tony, let's create a miracle together." The two sat down in the living room, and the servant brought 2 glasses of red wine. Tony Stark raised his glass and gestured to Zheng. "Cheers to our cooperation." "Cheers." Zheng responded, his heart full of expectations and determination. The sound of the glasses colliding echoed in the spacious hall, and the conversation between the two officially began at this moment. Zheng knew that this would be an extraordinary beginning, and he was ready to meet all challenges. As the night fell, the Manhattan skyline flickered charmingly in the distance. In Stark's villa, the lights were warm and soft, and the flames in the fireplace danced gently, reflecting on everyone's face. Zheng sat on the soft leather sofa, frowning slightly, and his eyes occasionally glanced at Tony Stark standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. "Tony, seriously, you have to consider letting Pepper and Ethan move in, or you can just rent an apartment and let Ethan accompany you." Zheng tone was relaxed, but with a hint of imperceptible persistence. Sure, Stark did not respond immediately, but just picked up the red wine in his hand and shook it gently, and the red liquid rippled under the light. "Are you sure? It might be a bit crowded for them to move in." He finally spoke, with his usual cynicism in his voice. Zheng shrugged. "I'm sure Pepper is your right-hand man, and Ethan also needs a safe environment. Besides, don't you think it's too quiet here?" Stark raised his eyebrows, as if he was interested in what Zheng said. He turned and walked to a wine cabinet, took out a bottle of red wine, poured half a glass, and pushed it in front of Zheng. "Some red wine? This is a good year," Stark suggested, with a hint of teasing in his eyes. Zheng waved his hand and refused with a smile. "Thanks, Tony. I don't drink. Just give me a can of Coke." Stark was stunned for a moment, obviously not expecting Zheng to refuse his red wine. "Coke? Do you really know what you are refusing?" He teased, but still turned to Happy and ordered, "Happy, go buy him a can of Coke." Happy responded and turned to leave the room. Stark sat opposite Zheng, crossed his hands on his knees, staring at Zheng with burning eyes. "This is your reward for reminding me last time. I hope you're satisfied." Zheng picked up the Coke, opened the pull ring, took a big sip, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. "Tony, your reward is a bit shabby," he complained. "Do you know how many tasks I have delayed because of your undercover secretary?" Stark raised his eyebrows, obviously interested in what Zheng said. "Undercover secretary? You mean Natasha Romanoff? I have investigated and found several commercial spies. I didn't expect them to infiltrate so deeply." There was a hint of complacency in his tone. Zheng shrugged. "Yeah, but do you know what I found? A clue about the kidnapping conspiracy." As soon as he finished speaking, Stark's face changed, and the originally relaxed expression was instantly replaced by a heavy one. "Kidnapping conspiracy? Tell me what's going on," Stark asked eagerly, leaning forward, almost standing up from the sofa. Zheng took another sip of Coke slowly, and then slowly said, "Tony, you are the famous Iron Man, but in a month, you didn't find out the mastermind behind the kidnapping plot. Is it that you can't find it out, or you don't want to find it at all?" Sure, Stark's face suddenly darkened, and a complex emotion flashed in his eyes. He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. "Zheng, don't talk to me in that tone. You know how much I value these things. Tell me, what did you find?" Zheng looked at Sure Stark with a trace of scrutiny in his eyes. "Tony, you have to understand that sometimes you are too focused on your own world and tend to ignore some obvious things. The mastermind behind the kidnapping conspiracy may be right next to you." Sure Stark was silent for a moment, then smiled bitterly. "Are you talking about Natasha Romanoff, or someone else?" he asked in a low voice, with a hint of self-mockery in his tone. Seeking flowers, Zheng did not answer directly, but stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the night in the distance. "Tony, think about it yourself. Who can do so many things under your nose? Who can get the most benefit from you?" Stark fell into deep thought, and the only sound in the room was the slight crackling of the fire in the fireplace. He understood that although Zheng words were harsh, they were not without reason. He needed to re-examine the people around him and find the enemy hiding in the dark. "I will find out." Stark finally spoke, his voice firm and powerful. He stood up, walked to Zheng and patted him on the shoulder. "Thank you, Zheng. I will handle it myself this time." Zheng smiled and patted Stark on the shoulder. "Tony, I believe you. But don't forget that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction." The two looked at each other for a moment and nodded in tacit understanding. The night was dark, but in this villa, a new battle was about to begin. Tony Stark sat in the dim studio, the light above his head hitting the metal table, reflecting a cold luster. His eyes were originally the usual confidence and disdain until Zheng Bin's words were like a sharp knife, directly hitting his heart. "What did you say?" Tony's voice was low, with a slight tremor that he himself didn't even notice. Zheng Bin didn't avoid it, looking directly at Tony. His eyes were so firm that it was frightening. "If one day you are gone, who will be the biggest beneficiary, Tony? Don't you think this question is worth thinking about?" Tony frowned, and his breathing became a little faster. His brain was working fast, trying to keep these words out of his mind. But Zheng Bin's words were like a venomous snake, which had already drilled into his head and began to, for 120, gnaw at his nerves. "Obadiah?" Tony muttered to himself, and when this name came out of his mouth, it seemed to carry 1,000 pounds of weight. He couldn't believe that he would actually connect this famous minister with the murderer behind the scenes. "Are you crazy? He is my father's best friend. Tony's voice began to be unstable, and even he could hear the shake in it. Zheng Bin didn't interrupt him, but just looked at Tony quietly, waiting for him to finish his words. He knew that at this time, Tony didn't need more verbal stimulation, but a process of sorting out his thoughts. Tony's memory was suddenly pulled back to his childhood. At that time, Obadiah was like a second father, taking him to the amusement park, buying him ice cream, and teaching him how to play baseball. Every time Howard was busy at work, Obadiah was by his side. Those warm pictures now seemed like irony, stinging Tony's eyes. "No, impossible." Tony's voice seemed to be squeezed out from the depths of his throat, with a hint of despair. His hands trembled involuntarily, and although he tried to hold them down with his other hand, the slight tremor still exposed his inner fluctuations. Zheng Bin finally spoke. His voice was calm and direct. "Tony, you are a smart man, and smart people should face the facts. Obadiah Stane. He is Howard Stark's best friend and your business partner. But don't forget, he is also the second in command of Stark Industries, and he has always wanted more and more power and more wealth." Tony's breathing became rapid, his fists clenched, and his nails almost dug into the flesh. He couldn't accept that his Uncle Yu, who had given him countless love and guidance, had such a vicious intention towards him. "Do you have evidence?" Tony finally raised his head and looked directly into Zheng Bin's eyes, with a desperate hope in his eyes. Zheng Bin did not avoid Tony's gaze. His eyes were still firm. "There is no direct evidence at present, but I can tell you where the evidence is." "You go check it, Tony. Check it yourself." Tony's heart sank suddenly. He knew that Zheng Bin would not say this for no reason. His brain worked quickly and began to analyze Zheng Bin's words. He needed evidence, and needed to find the evidence that could prove or overturn all this. "Where is it?" Tony's voice was low and rapid, like a volcano about to erupt. Zheng Bin turned slightly and pointed to an old computer in the corner of the studio. "There are communication records between your father and Obadiah in that computer. Go and see it and judge for yourself." Tony's eyes suddenly became sharp. He walked quickly to the computer, and his fingers tapped quickly on the keyboard. The codes and file names jumping on the screen were like tortures of his heart. His heart beat fast, and his hands trembled involuntarily. But he forced himself to calm down and began to read the files carefully. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. Tony's world was left with only the screen and the dazzling words on the screen. His eyes became empty, as if he had lost his soul. Those once warm memories now seemed like an elaborate scam that trapped him in it and warmed himself. Tony took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. He knew that now was not the time to collapse. He needed evidence and the truth. He continued to flip through the files, and every word pierced his heart like a needle. But he couldn't stop. He had to find the answer. Finally, his eyes stopped on an email. It was an email from Obadiah. The content was brief and direct, but it was enough to make Tony's heart sink to the bottom. "Tony, go and check it yourself." Zheng Bin's voice sounded behind him, like the final verdict. Tony didn't look back. His eyes were empty and lifeless, but his heart seemed to have set off a huge wave. He finally understood that those details that he had ignored and those seemingly unintentional actions were all a carefully planned conspiracy. His hands were still shaking, but he knew that he had to face this cruel reality. Because he Tony Stark, would never let anyone, even his uncle, escape the judgment of justice. The night was as dark as ink, and the lights were dim in the office on the top floor of Stark Industrial Building, and there was a depressing atmosphere in the air. Tony Stark sat behind his desk, his face pale and his eyes full of bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't closed his eyes for a few days, and he was in deep confusion and pain. His hands were crossed together, and his fingers kept rubbing, showing his inner anxiety and uneasiness. Zheng pushed the door open and saw Tony's appearance, and his heart sank. He originally planned to make a joke to ease the atmosphere, but at this moment he felt that his throat was like something. "Tony, I brought the evidence you wanted," Zheng said, putting a USB flash drive on the table. Tony raised his head, and a glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes, but then it was replaced by pain and doubt. "Zheng, I really don't know how to thank you. $1 million. This is what you deserve." His voice was hoarse and a little tired. Zheng grinned, trying to make the atmosphere more relaxed. $1 million? Tony, you are too stingy. You forgot that Obadiah is your uncle, and your loved ones have to pay more. Tony smiled bitterly, but soon his expression became serious. "Zheng, I really appreciate you. But seeing how I am now, do you really have a heart to take this money?" Zheng was stunned for a moment, and then sighed. "Okay, Tony, it's free this time. But you have to promise me that you won't be so depressed anymore." Tony nodded, his expression solemn. "Tell me what the evidence is." Zheng walked to the table and looked directly into Tony's eyes. "The evidence is in Obadiah Stanley's office computer. There is a video recording his conversation with the leader of the armed group who kidnapped you." Tony's eyes widened, full of shock and anger. "Obadiah, he actually—" "Yes." Zheng nodded, his tone heavy. "Moreover, the force that kidnapped you is 10 Rings, an organization with a century-old history. Their leader is Mandarin. Tony, this organization is not something you can deal with at the moment." Tony's hands tightly grasped the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening from the force. "Obadiah, what has he been doing behind my back?" Zheng took a deep breath and said slowly, "He has been selling arms to various armed forces, including the 10 Rings, because he wants to monopolize Stark Industries. He is dissatisfied with you." Tony's eyes turned cold, and a flame of anger ignited in his heart. "This be asterisk, 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 asterisk D." Zheng patted Tony 830's shoulder, trying to give him some comfort. "Tony, you have to be careful of your uncle. He is much more dangerous than you think." Tony lowered his head and was silent for a moment, then raised his head, and his eyes rekindled determination. "I won't let him succeed. I still have Happy Pepper," and you friends de Zheng smiled and nodded. "That's right, Tony. We will all support you. If you have anything, you can call me at any time, because we're friends." Tony held Zheng hand tightly, his voice hoarse but firm. "Thank you, Zheng. Really, thank you." Zheng smiled and patted Tony's face. "You're welcome, Tony. Remember, you are not alone. We are all by your side." After saying that, Zheng turned and left, leaving Tony alone in the office. Tony looked at the USB flash drive on the table, his eyes flashing with determination. He knew that the road ahead was full of thorns, but he was ready to face everything. The night wind blew in from the window, bringing a breath of fresh air. Tony took a deep breath, and the haze in his heart seemed to dissipate a little. He picked up the USB flash drive and put it into the computer interface, and the screen began to play the video that determined his fate. Zheng stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of the Stark Industrial Building. Through the glass, he saw Tony Stark sitting at the bar, holding a bottle of whiskey that had long been emptied in his hand. The lights in the room were dim, and the only light source came from a swaying chandelier, which was reflected in Tony's bloodshot eyes, like two flames that were about to go out. Zheng sighed. He could understand this feeling. After all, being betrayed by the person you trust the most is not something that everyone can bear. He took 2 steps closer, stopped again, and his eyes stayed on Stark for a few seconds. He knew that people like Tony didn't need comfort, but solitude. Comforting words were nothing more than scratching the surface. Only he could really help him get out of this situation. "Hey, Tony." Zheng Bin's voice was not loud, but was loud enough for Stark to hear. Tony raised his head, his eyes blurred, and he had obviously drunk a lot. "Oh, it's you, Zheng." Tony pulled the corners of his mouth and showed a smile that was uglier than crying. "Why? Are you here to see me laugh?" Zheng Bin shook his head and showed a bitter smile on his face. "Joke? No, Tony, I just came to see you and give you a piece of advice." Tony narrowed his eyes and seemed a little confused. "Advice? Ha! Do I, Tony Stark, need others to give me advice?" Zheng Bin ignored his sarcasm and said directly, "Some things, no matter how much others say, it's useless. You have to figure out yourself. What you need now is not wine nor sympathy, but time. Give yourself some time, and everything will be fine." Tony was silent for a moment, then smiled bitterly. "You're right, Zheng. But sometimes time is not the best antidote." Zheng Bin nodded, knowing that Tony Stark would survive because he was destined to become Iron Man. He patted Tony on the shoulder and left a meaningful sentence. "See you next time, you will be different." After saying that, Zheng Bin turned and left, leaving Tony with a lonely back. He understood that at this time, any extra comfort would be hypocritical. After walking out of the building, Zheng Bin exhaled and looked up at the sky. Today is a special day, and he deliberately put on that Zhongshan suit, which made him look particularly serious. He knew that he would look very different from his usual sloppy appearance today. "Hey, Zheng, are you going to attend an important meeting?" Deadpool's voice suddenly came from the side, interrupting his thoughts. Zheng Bin turned his head and saw that Deadpool was not wearing his iconic black and red tights today, but a casual outfit, revealing his severely burned face. That face, as if it had experienced the flames of hell, was unbearable to look at. "Oh, Wade, why are you fine today?" Zheng Bin asked in surprise. Deadpool shrugged and smiled indifferently. "Hey, today is a special day. I have to respect it. Besides, my face is like this. Why am I wearing Zhao De's tights?" Zheng Bin knew that Deadpool's face was because he participated in Project X and implanted regeneration ability to fight cancer. The regeneration ability and cancer formed a dynamic balance in his body, causing his appearance to remain severely burned. This is why Deadpool is the most shameless person in the Marvel Universe, because he has no face at all. "Okay, Wade, today is indeed a special day. Come with me to see it. The renovation of the community college is completed, which is a big deal," Zheng Bin said with a smile. Deadpool blinked his cunning eyes and teased, "Oh, Zheng, are you inviting me? It's rare. Well, for your sake, I'll accompany you." The two chatted and laughed all the way and soon arrived at Hell's Kitchen. This place was originally a dilapidated place, but today it is brand new. The community college sponsored by Zheng Bin has been renovated and has become brand new, as if it has been revitalized. "Wow, Zheng, it looks great here." Deadpool couldn't help but admire. Zheng Bin nodded, with a proud smile on his face. "Yeah, this used to be the worst place in Hell's Kitchen, but now has become a hopeful place." The two stood at the entrance of the college, watching the children coming in and out, their faces filled with happiness and hope. At this moment, Zheng Bin felt extremely relieved in his heart, and he knew that it was all worth it. Deadpool patted Zheng Bin on the shoulder, and 590 smiled and said, "Hey, Zheng, you did a great thing. It seems that today is indeed a special day." And Zheng Bin smiled and said nothing more. He just stood there quietly, feeling this rare tranquility and satisfaction. He knew that everything today was just a beginning, and there was still a long way to go in the future, but he was ready to face more challenges. Deadpool slumped on the sofa like a puddle of mud, holding a can of beer that was almost empty in his hand. The TV was playing a boring variety show, but his eyes were half closed and listless. His hair was messy, and his face was full of the four words, "No hope in life." "Belinda dumped me again, Deadpool hummed weakly, his tone full of self-pity. Zheng Bin was sitting on the chair opposite, looking down at his mobile phone, and heard Deadpool complain without even lifting his eyelids. "Dumped again? How many times has this happened to you? Didn't Belinda agree to get back together with you last month? This time is different, brother. This time she is really angry." Deadpool covered his forehead with a painful look. She said, I don't care about her at all. I only care about my beer and TV. Zheng finally raised his head and rolled his eyes. You care more about beer and TV than her. Everyone knows that? I think it a miracle that Belinda can tolerate you for so long. Deadpool let out a long sigh, as if the whole world owed him. I don't want to go out today. Brother, go by yourself. I want to reflect on myself here and think about life. Zheng shrugged, obviously used the Deadpool state. It's up to you, Seth. Anyway, you will be the same after reflecting. He stood up, put on his coat, and prepared to go out, walking on the familiar streets. Zheng mood was obviously much better than Deadpool. The morning sun shines on the road, giving everything a golden edge. He chooses to walk to the community college and inspect the street he is responsible for. On both sides of the street, vendors have already started a busy day. The stalls selling genuine bags display a variety of fashionable handbags, attracting passers-by. The breakfast stalls waft with fragrance, and the smell of fried dough sticks and soy milk makes Zheng swallow his saliva. There is also the huxia vendor, who is warmly greeting customers. The combination of soy milk and fried dough sticks is always a popular choice here. Zheng looked at all this and felt relieved. Who would have thought that a year ago this was still a place where gang fights and chaos and violence were staged almost every night? After his efforts, this street finally became orderly and restored its due peace and prosperity. He stopped, took a deep breath of the morning air, and a sense of comfort arose in his heart. Today, nothing to do. Listen to music in the brothel. He whispered to himself, as if this would make time stop at this moment and enjoy this rare peace. Before he knew it, Zheng had already reached the gate of the community college. He immediately saw Jeanne and his secretary Sharon O'Casey, who always had a blank expression, standing at the gate. Jeanne was wearing a neat suit, with his hands in his pockets, and was talking to Sharon in a low voice. Zheng smiled, walked up, and decided to say hello first. Jeanne, how come you have time to come here in person today? Can't you let Sharon handle this kind of trivial matter? Zheng tone was teasing, but there was a friendly smile on his face. Jeanne raised his head and saw Zheng, and a smile appeared on his face. Some things are better to do in person. Zheng, don't you think? Sharon stood behind Jeanne, still with that cold expression, as if everything in the outside world had nothing to do with her. Zheng smiled and nodded. That's true, but with Sharon by your side, what problems can be solved? Jeanne patted Sharon's shoulder and smiled proudly. She is indeed capable, but some things still require me to come in person. Zheng shrugged to show his understanding. Well, since you said so, there must be something important. The three stood at the entrance of the college, the sun shining on them, as if time had stopped at this moment. People were coming and going on the street. The vendors' shouts were coming and going. Everything seemed so harmonious and peaceful. Zheng prayed silently in his heart, hoping that such days could last for a long time, and that his efforts could keep the street peaceful and prosperous forever. He didn't know what the future would be like, but he knew that he would do his best to protect this hard-won peace. Jeanne seemed to see through Zheng mind, smiled, and broke the silence. Let's go in and talk about business. Zheng nodded, followed Jeanne and Sharon into the community college. He knew that new challenges were waiting for him ahead, but he was ready. No matter what the future holds, he will face it bravely, because he knows that the street and the city need him. The morning sun shone through the thin dew wine in the new campus, and Jeanne walked into the school gate, followed by his secretary Sharon O'Casey. His expression was as serious as ever, with his hands in his suit pants pockets. He scanned the surroundings with his slightly narrowed eyes. The school had just been renovated, and the air was still filled with a slight smell of paint and new bricks. Sharon, is this the renovation result you reported? Jeanne's voice was low and full of unquestionable majesty. Sharon hurriedly followed, holding a folder in her hand and a professional smile on her face. Yes, Mr. Jeanne. The school has been renovated as planned, and all projects have passed the acceptance. Today, I will give you a detailed introduction to each area. Jeanne nodded slightly, motioning her to continue. Sharon cleared her throat and began to introduce. The school is mainly divided into 3 areas: Teaching area, living area, and activity area. First of all, the teaching area includes a teaching building and a library. The teaching building has 3 floors, each with 12 classrooms, a total of 36 classrooms, which can accommodate students from grades 1 to 12, 3 classes in each grade. Please give me flowers, Zero. She pointed to the brand new teaching building not far away, the red brick walls gleaming in the sun. The library is located on the north side of the teaching building, with a rich collection of books and a modern electronic reading room. Jeanne Bing raised his eyebrows, seeming to be quite satisfied with the arrangement. Continue. Sharon flipped a page of the document and continued. The living area includes a cafeteria and dormitory building. At present, we have a completed dormitory building with 6 floors and 20 rooms on each floor. Each room is 200 square feet, and the original plan was to accommodate 4 people in each room. Speaking of this, Sharon paused and looked at Jeanne Bing. Mr. Zheng, 200 square feet for 4 people. Is the space too small for Jeanne? Jeanne Bing frowned, as if thinking about this question. After a moment, he turned his head to look at Zheng Bin, the person in charge of the school project. Zheng Bin, what do you think? Zheng Bin pushed the glasses on his nose and answered without hesitation. Then change it to 3 people per room. Sharon was obviously surprised by this decision, and she slightly widened her eyes. 6 people? Isn't it too crowded? Zheng Bin smiled, his tone firm and powerful. Sharon, you may not understand the current situation of Hell's Kitchen. Many children don't even have a place to live. They can only sleep on shabby sofas or even live on the streets. In comparison, 6 people a room is not crowded. Jeanne Bing heard this, and the corners of his mouth slightly raised, revealing a smile of approval. Zheng Bin is right. We are not serving those children who live in high-end 627 apartments. We are providing a home for the children in Hell's Kitchen. Although space is limited, hope is unlimited. Sharon nodded. Although she still had doubts in her heart, she did not raise any more objections. She knew that Jeanne Bing's decision was well thought out. The group continued to move forward. When passing the cafeteria, Jeanne Bing stopped. The glass of the dining room was polished to a shine, and the tables and chairs inside were neatly arranged. Is the capacity of the cafeteria enough? Jeanne Bing asked. Sharon immediately replied, The cafeteria can accommodate 300 people at the same time. We plan to dine in batches, consumer protection, so that every student has enough time to eat. Jeanne Bing nodded and continued to move forward to the activity area. The basketball court, football field, and running track here have been paved, and there are still morning dew on the lawn. The facilities in the activity area look good. Jeanne Bing finally showed a satisfied smile. Zheng Bin took the opportunity to add, We also plan to build an indoor gymnasium here, so that even on rainy days, students have a place to play. Jeanne Bing stopped and turned to look at Zheng Ji. Okay, continue to promote this project. We have to make sure every detail is done to the best, so that these children can have a real learning paradise. Sharon followed behind, silently taking note of every detail. She knew that there was still a lot of work to be done. But with Jeanne Bing's support and Zheng Bin's execution, the project would be successfully completed. The sun gradually rose, and everything on the campus seemed so vibrant. For the children of Hell's Kitchen, this is not just a school, but also a new beginning, a future full of hope. Under the dim light, the shabby bar was filled with the smell of cheap beer. In the corner sat a few middle-aged people with tired faces and empty eyes. This is Hell's Kitchen, a forgotten corner. Jeanne Bing sat on an old wooden chair, lowered his head slightly, and listened to Zheng Bin's words. His expression was as gloomy as ever, but after hearing Zheng Bin's explanation of the dormitory arrangement, he nodded gently. 6 people in one room? Here, this is not a problem. Jeanne Bing's low voice was particularly clear in the noise of the bar. It's good enough for these children to have a place to live. Zheng Bin stood next to Jeanne Bing, with a smile on his face, but his eyes showed some helplessness. Yes, Mr. Jeanne Bing, you know the situation here. However, I think our secretary, Ms. Sharon, should visit the dormitory of Dongfang University. The conditions there, hey, 8 people in 10 rooms are considered good. Sharon stood aside, frowning slightly, tried to interrupt. Mr. Zheng, I understand what you mean, but our school is not a prison after all. Providing a safe learning environment for children is what you have always emphasized. Moreover, we have installed heating. You know, it is not easy to live here in winter. Zheng Bin turned his head and looked at Sharon, with a meaningful arc at the corner of his mouth. Miss Sharon, you are right. Installing short gas is indeed a wise decision. However, I did not build this university dormitory according to prison standards. 6 people in one room is already considered merciful. 1.4 Sharon nodded, but still insisted on her point of view. In any case, your generosity will be remembered by the children of Hell's Kitchen. They need such opportunities. Zheng Bin smiled and waved his hand. Kindness? Miss Sharon, you think too highly of me. I just do what I can in reality. Air conditioning is too expensive and not cost-effective. In the winter in New York, you know, heating is a necessity. Sharon took a deep breath. She knew that what Zheng Bin said made sense, but she still felt a little reluctant. But, Mr. Zheng, what will the children do in the summer? Without air conditioning, how can they survive those hot days? Zheng Bin shrugged his shoulders and showed a helpless smile on his face. Then let them learn to be patient. What we can do is limited, and it is impossible to be perfect. It is not easy to give them a safe place to study. Sharon wanted to say something else, but seeing the firmness on Zheng Bin's face, she had to give up. She knew that Zheng Bin's original intention was just to give these children a place to go to school, but she also hoped to get better conditions for the children. Zheng Bin looked at Sharon and felt a little satisfied. Although the original intention of building a school was just to let the children have books to read, it is also a good thing to have such a good reputation. He turned his head and looked at Jeanne Bing, nodding slightly. Mr. Jeanne Bing, what do you think? Jeanne Bing raised his head. His eyes were like torches, and his voice was low and powerful. You have done enough, Zheng Bin. These children have a place to live and a place to study, which is already their blessing. Fame is just an additional thing. Zheng Bin smiled, and the pressure in his heart was slightly relieved. He knew what Jeanne Bing's recognition meant. In this cruel world, sometimes 10 o'clock is definitely enough. Sharon stood aside and watched the two people talking silently. She knew that reality was always crueler than ideals, but she still hoped to get more warmth and care for these children. The hustle and bustle in the bar was still there, but the conversation between Zheng Bin and Jeanne Bing made this corner seem particularly quiet. The two had their own plans, but their goals were unexpectedly the same: to have a better future for the children of Hell's Kitchen. As the night deepened, the lights in the bar became dimmer, but the flame of hope was quietly ignited in the hearts of the two. The sun shone through the thin clouds on the brand-new campus. Zheng Bin followed the young and capable secretary and slowly walked through this land full of hope. The stone road under his feet still had a newly paved cold breath, and the green plants on both sides were neatly trimmed, as if foreshadowing a brand-new beginning. Mr. Zheng, there are 2 basketball courts here, and students can play at any time. The secretary's voice rang in his ears, accompanied by the crisp dribbling sound on the basketball court. Zheng Bin stopped and swept his eyes across the flat field, as if he'd already seen the students sweating on the field. And here, our boxing gym and shooting hall. The secretary pointed to 2 buildings not far away, the metal walls gleaming in the sun. In the boxing gym, there was a dull sound of hitting, as if injecting an unyielding force into the campus. However, when they walked to the reserved open space, the secretary's face darkened slightly. Mr. Zheng, unfortunately, due to insufficient area, the American football field could not be built. Zheng Bin frowned slightly, but soon relaxed. He knew that it was not easy to have such a campus in the city center. We will find a way to solve it, he said firmly, as if to encourage himself. The secretary nodded, and then mentioned a more difficult problem. Mr. Zheng, we may encounter some troubles in enrollment. Most of the teenagers in Hell's Kitchen provide fresh blood for the gangs. If we recruit them all into the school, the gangs will definitely not agree. Zheng Bin's heart sank. He had expected this problem. Hell's Kitchen, that corner shrouded in darkness, where people live in fear and despair, and the gangs are their nightmares that they cannot get rid of. It seems that we need a solution. Zheng muttered to himself, and several ideas flashed through his mind. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he thought of a person, Jeanne. Zheng said softly, as if this name originally contained some kind of power. I can throw this question to him and see if he has any suggestions. The secretary showed a hint of doubt, but did not ask more. She knew that Zheng had his own considerations. That night, Zheng met Jeanne in a secret club. The gang leader was sitting leisurely on the sofa, playing with a wine glass in his hand, as if he didn't care about anything. Jeanne, I need your help. Zheng said straight to the point. Jeanne raised his head. His eyes were like torches. Zheng, you are a rare guest. What brought you here? Those kids in Hell's Kitchen. I want to recruit them into the school, but the gang won't agree. Zheng looked directly into Jeanne's eyes, without any reservations. Jeanne was silent for a moment, and then showed a meaningful smile. You want to move the cheese of the gang, which is not easy. I know. So, I want to send an invitation letter in my name to call all the gangs to a meeting. Use your influence to make them give me this face. Zheng said with a firm tone. Jeanne nodded, but then shook his head. Zheng, I can help you gather them and speak for you, but you have to understand that these gangs are unruly. Even if I come forward, they may not fully accept my proposal. Zheng's heart sank, but he had expected this result. I understand. I will do it myself to convince them. You just need to help me open this door. Jeanne looked at Zheng with a hint of admiration in his eyes. Okay, Zheng, I'll help you. But remember, the rest of the road is up to you. Zheng nodded, and an inexplicable determination surged in his heart. He knew that this road was destined to be full of thorns, but he had no choice. For those children living in the dark, he must move forward bravely. When leaving the club, night had fallen, and the city's neon lights flickered in the distance, as if adding a touch of false prosperity to this city that never sleeps. Zheng took a deep breath and stepped firmly toward the unknown challenge. He knew that the road ahead would not be smooth, but he knew even more that this was the road he had to go on. For the future of those children, he was willing to give it a try. As night fell, the streets of Hell's Kitchen seemed to be splashed with a layer of insoluble ink. The air was filled with a mixed smell of motor oil and rotten food. The dim street lights swayed in the cold wind, and occasionally a few rats ran through the garbage dump. Zheng stood at the school gate, his hands in his windbreaker pockets, staring deeply at the street corner not far away. This place is really rotten. Zheng whispered to himself, with a hint of reluctance and determination in his voice. He turned to look at his secretary, Sharon. We must solve the problem from the root, Sharon. These children, they should not grow up in such an environment. Sharon pushed her glasses and nodded seriously. Yes, Mr. Zheng, it is enough to strengthen security measures. The situation is much more complicated. Zheng raised his mouth slightly, revealing an unquestionable firmness. Enough. As long as we can give children a relatively safe learning environment, they have hope, even if it is just a little bit. He paused, his eyes became sharper. I want these children to understand that even in hell, they can create a colorful black. Sharon looked at Zheng, and a feeling of admiration surged in her heart, but she couldn't help but remind him, I will immediately arrange for workers to install electrified barbed wire on the wall to ensure that the only way in and out of the school is the gate. However, doing so may cause dissatisfaction among some gangs of Lima. Zheng sneered, Dissatisfied? Let them come to me. I want to protect the future of these children, not the interests of those scum. At the same time, in a hidden factory not far from the school, the air was filled with the smell of motor oil and metal. The factory is ostensibly a vehicle repair and modification shop, but in reality it is the headquarters of an Irish gang. Inside the office, the lights are dim, with a few tattered Irish flags hanging on the wall and an invitation letter placed on a tattered table. Twin brothers Tom and Ralph sat at the table, holding whiskey glasses in their hands. Tom was tall, with a stubble on his face and a serious look. Ralph was relatively thin, but his eyes were cunning. Tom, look at this. Ralph handed the invitation to Tom, his tone full of sarcasm and dissatisfaction. Kingpin's Mosquito invited us to attend a community school meeting. What a joke. Tom took the invitation, glanced at it roughly, and then snorted coldly. What do they want to do? Want us to deal with those little brats? Kingpin's hand is too long. Ralph shook his head in dissatisfaction. He not only wants to interfere in the school, he is testing us. After Kingpin's rise, the influence of our Irish 360 gang is not as good as before, but he shouldn't underestimate us. Tom frowned, thought for a moment, and said, We can't refuse directly. It will make us look afraid of him. But we can't completely obey. We have to find a way to let them know how powerful we are. A gleam of light flashed in Ralph's eyes. Yes, we can go to the meeting, but we must let them know that any decision of Hell's Kitchen cannot be made without the participation of our Irish gangs. The two looked at each other and nodded in tacit understanding. On the street outside the factory, vehicles occasionally passed by, and the lights flickered in the night, as if foreshadowing the coming of 10 storms. We must let them, Sifa, know that the Irish gangs are still there and should not be underestimated. Ralph raised his glass and sneered at the corners of his mouth. Tom also raised his glass, and the two clinked their glasses lightly, making a crisp sound. In this dark Hell's Kitchen, a new contest is quietly brewing. As night fell, the neon lights of Hell's Kitchen flickered in the drizzle, reflecting the muddy puddles on the street. There was a damp and corrupt smell in the air, as if the soul of the city was slowly rotting. Tom Ralph stood in his dim office, looking at the outside world through the stained window. His younger brother Jerry stood aside with a look of disdain on his face. Don't you think Jeanne Bing takes himself too seriously? It's just a few invitations. Why should we go to support him? Jerry's voice was full of provocation. He didn't take Jeanne Bing seriously at all. Tom didn't answer immediately. He turned around, and his expression was as gloomy as the weather outside. Jerry, you are too impulsive. Jeanne Bing now thinks he is the master here. We can't confront him head-on. Jerry sneered. Master? Who does he think he is? We don't need to give him face. If he pushes him too far, we will be in trouble. Tom frowned. He knew that Jerry's temper needed to be guided. You're still too young. Jeanne Bing is not so easy to deal with. But you are right. We don't need to give him face. He paused, a gleam of light flashed in his eyes. But we have to be smarter than him. Jerry was obviously confused by Tom's words. What do you mean? Tom walked to the table, picked up a golden invitation letter, and played with it in his hands. Mrs. Gao has contacted me. He whispered, as if the name had some kind of magic. To read Jing Shuang's novels, go to Feilu Novel Network. Jerry's eyes widened. Mrs. Gao the Hand? How could she? She is very clear about the situation between us and Jeanne Bing, and knows that Jeanne is not reliable. She suggested that we join forces to get rid of Jeanne Bing. Tom's voice was low and powerful, as if squeezed out from the depths of his throat. Jerry took a breath. Join forces? What does she want us to do? She said that as long as our AI air gang can get rid of Jeanne Bing, the Hand will support us to become the new owner of Hell's Kitchen. Tom's words were like a bomb that exploded in Jerry's mind. Jerry was stunned. He didn't expect things to develop to this point. He opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Tom looked at his brother and continued. Although Jeanne Bing's power is great, he also has weaknesses. His godson Zheng Bin is not to be feared. Our real opponent is Jeanne Bing himself. Jerry's eyes became complicated, and he began to understand Tom's strategy. So, we have to gather forces secretly and wait for the opportunity? Tom nodded. That's right. We have to let everyone know that Jeanne is not invincible. Gather all those who have received the invitation letter, and we will go to the meeting together. Jerry finally smiled. Okay, I will go to gather the brothers. Let them know that the AI gang is not easy to mess with. Tom patted his brother's shoulder. Be careful and don't alert the snake. Jeanne Wan spies are everywhere. Jerry nodded and turned away. Tom looked out the window again, and the rain seemed to be getting heavier. He knew in his heart that the storm had just begun. At the same time, at the edge of Hell's Kitchen, in the territory of the Mexican gang, the air was filled with a stronger smell of drugs. In the narrow alleys, the dilapidated buildings stood like ruins, and the walls were covered with graffiti. The environment here is complex, and the population density is high, which is the best place for crime and escape. Carlos, the boss of the Mexican gang, was sitting in a dim basement, and his men were reporting the latest intelligence to him. The AI gang is gathering, and they may target Kingpin. Carlos smiled slightly, revealing his yellow teeth. Kingpin? He won't live long. Madame Gao has already informed us that as long as Kingpin dies, we can also get a share. His men nodded. Then what should we do? Carlos' eyes became cold. Hold on and wait and see. When the AI gang and Kingpin are both defeated, we will take action to clean up the mess. The basement was silent, with only the ticking of the wall clock echoing. Carlos knew that in this power game in Hell's Kitchen, whoever laughs last is the real winner. And on the streets, drug addicts and outsiders wander like ghosts. Their eyes were empty, as if they had lost their souls. This is the darkest corner of Hell's Kitchen, and the last refuge of those who want to escape reality. The air is filled with despair and despair, as if every corner of the city is waiting to be saved or destroyed. The dusk in the Mexican slums is like being covered by a gray filter. The low houses are close together. The dilapidated walls are covered with graffiti, and the air is filled with corruption and despair. On the narrow streets, you can occasionally see a few skinny wild dogs rummaging through the garbage dump for food. This place is Gus' territory, a corner full of danger and violence, in a house with a shabby appearance. It is a different scene. The heavy curtains cover the desolation of the outside world, and the tapestries on the wall and the exquisite chandeliers seem out of place. Gus, the leader of the gang, is sitting on a leather sofa inlaid with gems, holding a glass of whiskey in his hand. Around him are a group of Latino gang members who also live a luxurious life, some of whom are smoking cigars, and some are playing with guns in their hands. Please send flowers 0. Bang! The door was pushed open, and a confidant carrying an AK-47 walked in quickly, with a hint of nervousness on his face. Boss, there's a letter from Jeanne. 0. Gus frowned, took the envelope, roughly tore open the seal, and pulled out the invitation letter inside. His eyes quickly scanned the contents of the letter, and the expression on his face gradually became ferocious. Zheng, he dared to invite me? Gus' voice seemed to be squeezed out from between his teeth, with uncontrollable anger. This be asterisk, 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 asterisk. The actual wants to talk about cooperation with me? Who does he think he is? He suddenly crumpled the invitation letter into a ball and threw it to the ground. Did you hear what he said? Looking forward to discussing big plans with you, ha! If I see him at the meeting, I will definitely pull out my gun and send him to hell. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became tense, and the gang members looked at each other, and no one dared to speak. Gus stood up and paced back and forth, obviously thinking about the next move 3. We can't let him succeed so easily. Gus' eyes flashed with a hint of viciousness. I'm going to give him a gift. You go find a drug addict, plant a time bomb on him, and let him detonate it at the meeting. His words were cold and ruthless, as if he was talking about something that was too ordinary. The confidant nodded, and immediately took out his phone to make arrangements. But this is not enough, Gus continued, his voice full of hatred. Zheng, that be asterisk, 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 asterisk D, oppose my business here at 737, causing my men to hit a wall repeatedly. This time, I want him to die without a burial place. He looked at his confidant with an unquestionable command in his tone. You go hire those mutant mercenaries and tell them that I will pay them double the reward Song Yaonin killed. The room was silent, with only Gus' voice echoing. His plan was cold and careful, and every detail revealed his viciousness and determination. I want Zheng to know what the consequences of offending me are. The flame of revenge flashed in Gus' eyes, as if it seen the end of Zheng. The gang members acted quickly, and each one to execute Gus' orders. The atmosphere in the room was still tense, but there was more suppressed excitement. Everyone understood that this would be a bloody contest, and Gus would never give up easily. The night gradually fell, and the dilapidated houses in the slums looked even more gloomy in the night. And in that luxurious house, Gus' revenge plan had just begun. As the night fell, the neon lights of Hell's Kitchen flickered in the humid air, reflecting the dirt and unbearableness of every corner of the street. Rain dripped along the dilapidated signs, like background music for the sins of the city. Zheng Bin stood at the entrance of a dark alley, holding an unlit cigarette in his hand, his brows furrowed. Cutting off someone's wealth is like killing their parents. Gust's voice seemed to come from the depths of hell, with endless resentment and anger. But money is much more important to me than my parents. Zheng Bin smiled coldly and put the cigarette back into the cigarette box. Gust, your greed will lead you to a dead end. Dead end? Humph. Gust sneered, his eyes flashing with madness. I have nothing to lose. But you, Zheng Bin, you will lose everything. I will make you have no place to stand in Hell's Kitchen. Gust's plan has already taken shape in his mind. He will not do it himself. That would be too easy for Zheng Bin. He will use chaos and 10 real disasters to destroy Zheng Bin's reputation and things. Human bomb, the perfect tool. Gust muttered to himself, his fingers tapping lightly on the table, as if playing a piece of death music. Even if Zheng Bin can't be killed, his territory can be bloody, making it difficult for him to gain a foothold in the gang. A cruel smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Even if the plan fails, he will not lose anything. He has enough funds to continue to hire mutants to perform similar tasks until Zheng Bin is dead. At the same time, on the other side of Hell's Kitchen, bordering the rich area, the atmosphere in the territory of the Razor Gang seemed unusually calm. The streets here are clean, and the street lights are bright, which is in sharp contrast to the dilapidated Hell's Kitchen. In a typical British-style villa, Tommy Shelby sat quietly on the sofa, holding a cup of English afternoon tea in his hand. His eyes were deep and indifferent, as if he could see through everything. On the table was an open invitation letter, which was sent by Zheng Bin, inviting him to attend a so-called 1.3 peace party. Peace! Tommy snorted contemptuously and put the invitation letter back on the table. Zheng Bin and Jeanne, when did these guys become so naive? His thoughts went back to when his brother Arthur was still alive. How glorious the Razor Gang was at that time. Arthur's leadership allowed the gang to stand firm in countless gang wars. But now, Arthur is gone, and he is the only one left to support the entire family. Tommy, our spies reported that Gus is planning a big move. John, a subordinate beside him, whispered with a little uneasiness in his tone. Tommy raised his eyebrows slightly, picked up the teacup, and took a sip. Big move? He wants to use a bomb? Humph, typical Gus style. Yes, he wants to create chaos, even at the expense of innocent people. John continued. Innocent? Tommy sneered. There is no innocence in Hell's Kitchen. Everyone has their own sins. However, Gus' plan may be an opportunity for us. He put down the teacup, stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the brightly lit wealthy area in the distance. We can take this opportunity to weaken the power of Zheng Bin and Jeanne. After all, in chaos, no one knows what will happen. 11 foot. You mean we secretly support Gus? John was a little surprised. No, we don't support him. We just add fuel to the fire when necessary. Tommy's eyes became sharp. We need to let everyone know that Razor is the real master of Hell's Kitchen. As soon as he finished speaking, a burst of hurried footsteps came from outside the door. A subordinate hurried in with a panicked look. Tommy, Gus people have already started to act. They are carrying bombs, and their target is Zheng Bin's party. Tommy's expression did not change at all, but he nodded slightly. The show was about to begin. He turned and looked at John with a firm gaze. Pass the order down. All the Razor Party members are ready. We must seize our opportunity in this chaos. Under the night, the streets of Hell's Kitchen became darker. The rain was still dripping, as it played the final prelude to the tragedy that was about to take place. In an abandoned warehouse not far away, Gus' men were nervously preparing for their mission. They were tied with simple explosives, and their eyes flashed with fanaticism and despair. Remember, our target is not Zheng Bin, but to create chaos. 11 Gus stood in front of them, his voice low and powerful. As long as there is chaos, Zheng Bin and Jeanne will find it difficult to escape. Our mission will be successful. The men nodded one after another, their eyes full of determination. They knew that this was a road of no return. But for them, this might be the only thing they could do. for Gus, and for their own survival. Action! Gus gave an order, and the men left the warehouse one after another and disappeared into the night. In the villa, Tommy Shelby stood in front of the window, looking at the darkness approaching in the distance, with a meaningful smile on his lips. Zheng Bin, Jeanne Bing, this game has just begun, he said softly. His voice was covered by the sound of rain, as if it had never existed. The rain was getting heavier, and the whole Hell's Kitchen seemed to be shrouded in a hazy mist. The neon lights on the street were still flashing, but in this rain curtain, they seemed particularly powerless. A storm was quietly brewing. In the dim bar, the lights were dim, and the air was filled with a mixed smell of tobacco and cheap alcohol. At a worn-out wooden table, Vangalai, the young Asian man with a yellow quill, was scanning his men with his hawk-like eyes. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, as if he was beating some kind of silent beat. We must take 950 of this place tonight. Vangalai's voice was low but full of deterrence, as if every word carried a blade. His men moved quickly and orderly, moving supplies and checking weapons. The whole process was like a precision-operated machine. Boss, those guys in Midtown are not easy to mess with. Are we taking too much risk by being so anxious? A subordinate asked with some concern. Vangalai sneered, and a trace of disdain flashed in his eyes. Risk? In Hell's Kitchen, if you don't take risks, you can only wait for death. Those guys are kings of their own, and no one is willing to submit to anyone else. This is our best opportunity. 11. At the moment, the door of the bar was pushed open, and a familiar figure walked in. It was Zheng Bin, who was wearing a dark windbreaker and had a usual calm expression on his face.
Hello, everyone. As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500+ novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.